My name is Sally Peterson, 63 years old with more wrinkles than I care to count and a heart full of motherly love. After 30 years as a nurse, I spent my hard-earned retirement savings on a surprise trip to London to visit my only son, Marcus. The excitement I felt stepping off that plane shattered when Marcus opened his door, his face darkening at the sight of me. Little did I know my surprise visit would end with me sobbing in the rain, abandoned by my own child. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from, and subscribe if family drama hits close to home. I never thought I would be that mother. You know the type, the one who gets pushed aside when her children grow up and start their own lives. For most of my life, I was Sally Peterson, a dedicated nurse at Springfield Memorial Hospital in Illinois. I worked in the pediatric ward for 30 years, caring for other people's children while raising my own son as a single mother. Marcus was only 8 when my husband Thomas died from a sudden heart attack. One day we were planning a family camping trip, and the next I was planning a funeral. Life can change in the blink of an eye, and mine certainly did. After Thomas passed, it was just Marcus and me against the world. I remember the nights I would come home exhausted after a double shift, my feet throbbing only to help Marcus with his science project, or drive him to baseball practice. We never had much money, but we had each other. I made sure he never felt the weight of our financial struggles. When he needed a computer for school, I picked up extra weekend shifts. When he wanted those expensive basketball shoes all the kids were wearing, I skipped getting my hair done for 6 months. That was what being a mother meant to me, putting his needs above my own. Marcus was a bright child, always curious and ambitious. By the time he reached high school, he was at the top of his class. I still remember his graduation day, how proud I felt watching him deliver the valedictorian speech. He looked so much like his father, standing up there, confident and full of promise. College was another financial mountain to climb. I refinanced our small house twice to help pay his tuition at Northwestern University. He studied finance and business, dreaming of working for a prestigious international firm. I would send him care packages with homemade cookies and hand-knitted scarves, even though he told me it was embarrassing. Every other weekend he would come home, and we would watch old movies together, or take walks by the lake. Those were some of my happiest memories. After graduation, Marcus worked for a few years in Chicago. He would visit regularly, calling me almost every day. We remained close, or at least I thought we did. Then 5 years ago, he got the opportunity. He had been waiting for a position with Harrington Global Finance in London. I was heartbroken to see him go so far away, but thrilled for his success. I helped him pack up his apartment, bought him a new suit for his first day, and drove him to the airport with tears in my eyes and pride in my heart. The first year he was gone, we video called weekly. He would show me around his new apartment, tell me about the places he had visited, the people he had met. I noticed his accent gradually changing, becoming more British, less Midwestern. He seemed to be thriving, and I was happy for him, even though I missed him terribly. But over the past 2 years, something shifted. Our weekly calls became monthly, then sporadic at best. He always had an excuse. He was working late, traveling for business, attending important networking events. The Marcus I knew was disappearing, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who seemed too busy for his mother. Retirement hit me harder than I expected. After 3 decades of bustling hospital corridors and the constant needs of others, the silence of my empty house was deafening. My coworkers threw me a lovely retirement party. They gave me a watch and a scrapbook full of photos from over the years. But once the celebration ended, I found myself alone with too much time and too few purposes. I tried to fill my days with gardening, book clubs, and volunteer work at the local animal shelter. I made new friends, mostly other retired women like myself. But there was always something missing, a Marcus-shaped hole in my life that nothing else could fill. His 35th birthday was approaching, and it had been over a year since I had seen him in person. Our last video call had lasted less than 5 minutes before he said he had another meeting to attend. As I stared at his birthday card, trying to think of what to write, an idea took hold. What if instead of sending a card, I showed up in person? The thought of seeing his face, hugging him again after so long, made my heart race with excitement. I called James, Marcus's oldest friend, who he had kept in touch with, to ask what he thought of my surprise visit idea. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Mrs. P," James said enthusiastically. "Marcus has been working too hard. Having you there would be good for him. Plus, you've never been to Europe, right? It's about time." James's encouragement was all I needed. I checked my savings account, the money I had been putting away for years for emergencies, or maybe a cruise someday. $8,500, my entire retirement nest egg. The round-trip ticket to London would take a big chunk, and London was expensive, but this was my son. What better way to use my savings than to reconnect with him? I applied for my first passport feeling like a teenager as I waited in line at the post office. I bought new clothes, nothing fancy, but nicer than my usual jeans and sweaters. I wanted to look good for Marcus to show him I could fit into his new sophisticated world. The preparations gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since retirement. I researched London attractions, practiced using the currency converter on my phone, and even tried to learn a few British expressions, though I knew they spoke English there. I was going to make this trip perfect. The day finally arrived. My friend Susan drove me to the airport, warning me about jet lag and pickpockets as if I were her child leaving for college. The flight was long and uncomfortable, my knees aching from the cramped economy seat, but I was too excited to care. I watched the little airplane icon move across the screen, bringing me closer and closer to Marcus with each passing minute. Landing at Heathrow Airport was overwhelming. So many people rushing in all directions, announcements in various languages echoing through the vast terminals. I clutched my small suitcase, following the signs to ground transportation. The taxi driver raised his eyebrows when I gave him Marcus's address in Kensington, an upscale neighborhood, according to my guidebook. As the taxi navigated through the congested London streets, my excitement began to mix with anxiety. What if Marcus wasn't home? What if he was traveling for work? I hadn't considered these possibilities in my enthusiasm. I should have called him, given him some warning. But it was too late now. Rain started to fall as we approached his building, a modern glass and steel structure that looked more like an office than a home. My heart pounded as I paid the taxi driver, wincing at the cost. Standing on the sidewalk with my suitcase looking up at the gleaming building where my son lived, I felt small and out of place. The doorman eyed me suspiciously as I entered the lobby, my raincoat dripping on the marble floor. When I told him I was there to see Marcus Peterson, he made a phone call, speaking too quietly for me to hear. After a long moment, he pointed me toward the elevator. "15th floor apartment, 1502, he said, his tone making it clear he doubted I belonged there. As the elevator rose, so did my anxiety. The doors opened to a hallway with plush carpeting and art on the walls that probably cost more than my house. I found apartment 1502 and stood before it. My hand raised to knock, suddenly frozen with doubt. What if this was a mistake? What if Marcus didn't want to see me? The rain outside grew heavier, pattering against the hallway windows like a warning. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The moment Marcus opened the door is forever etched in my memory. His eyes widened in shock, not the happy surprise I had imagined, but something closer to horror. He was dressed in an expensive-looking suit, his hair styled differently than I remembered, longer on top, and perfectly groomed. For a split second before his expression changed, I didn't recognize my own son. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. "Surprise, happy early birthday, sweetheart." Marcus glanced over his shoulder into the apartment, then back at me. His jaw tightened. "You should have called first." Despite his cold reception, he stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the London skyline, minimalist furniture that looked straight out of a design magazine, and not a single personal item in sight. No photos, no mementos, nothing that indicated this was my son's home. I noticed right away that the place was prepared for some kind of gathering. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket on the kitchen counter. Several wine glasses were lined up neatly beside platters of what looked like expensive hors d'oeuvres. "I'm sorry to barge in like this," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I wanted to surprise you for your birthday. I've missed you so much." Before Marcus could respond, a young woman emerged from what I assumed was the bedroom. She was tall and slender, with shoulder-length blonde hair and the kind of effortless elegance that comes from money. She looked confused by my presence. "Marcus," she said, her British accent pronounced. Marcus cleared his throat. "Amelia, this is my mother, Sally. Mom, this is Amelia." Amelia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "Oh, lovely to meet you. Marcus didn't mention you were visiting." "He didn't know," I said, extending my hand. "It was meant to be a surprise." Amelia shook my hand, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How spontaneous." Marcus checked his watch, exchanging a look with Amelia that made me feel like an unwanted intruder. "Mom, we actually have plans tonight. I have dinner reservations with some colleagues from work. Important people." "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "That's fine. I can just wait here until you get back. Or maybe you could recommend a restaurant nearby. I haven't eaten since the airplane food." Marcus and Amelia exchanged another look. "Actually," Marcus said slowly, "maybe you should come along. It might be awkward to explain why you're staying in my apartment otherwise." His words stung, but I forced a smile. "If you're sure I won't be intruding." While Marcus and Amelia finished getting ready, I wandered around the apartment trying to find traces of my son in this sterile, stylish space. On a bookshelf, I found a single framed photo. It showed Marcus with a group of sophisticated-looking friends at what appeared to be a yacht club. His arm was around Amelia, and on his other side stood an older couple, elegantly dressed and distinguished-looking. "Who are these people?" I asked when Marcus re-entered the room. He took the photo from my hands and placed it back on the shelf. "Just friends. You need to change if you're coming to dinner. It's a very upscale restaurant." I looked down at my travel outfit, suddenly conscious of how plain and Midwestern I must appear to him now. "This is the nicest thing I brought." Marcus sighed. "Fine. Just try not to talk too much about Springfield or the hospital. These are sophisticated people." The taxi ride to the restaurant was tense. Marcus sat between Amelia and me, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I tried to make conversation, asking about his job, his life in London, but his answers were short and dismissive. The restaurant was the fanciest place I had ever been, with crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and more utensils than I knew what to do with. Marcus's boss, a stern-looking man named Richard Harrington, was already seated with his wife and another couple when we arrived. "Ah, Peterson," Mr. Harrington said, standing to shake Marcus's hand. "Right on time, as always." "Sir, this is Amelia, whom you've met," Marcus said, then hesitated, looking at me with what could only be described as dread. "And this is my mother. She surprised me with a visit." Mr. Harrington's eyebrows shot up. "Your mother? From Boston, correct, the surgeon." I looked at Marcus in confusion. "Boston surgeon. Actually," I said before Marcus could speak, "I'm from Springfield, Illinois. I was a nurse before I retired last year." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mrs. Harrington gave me a tight smile. "How lovely. Marcus has never mentioned Illinois before." Throughout the dinner, I tried to connect, to be charming and interesting. I shared stories about Marcus as a child, how he had won the science fair in 5th grade with his project on wind energy, how he had broken his arm climbing a tree in our backyard, but still insisted on going to baseball practice the next day. With each story, Marcus grew more tense, his knuckles white around his wine glass. I could see the other guests exchanging glances, and I realized with a sinking heart that my son had been lying about his background. He had created a new identity for himself, one that didn't include a single mother from Illinois who worked as a nurse. "So, Sally," Mr. Harrington said during dessert, "how long are you staying in London?" 2 weeks, I replied. "I've never been abroad before, so I want to see all the sights." 2 weeks, Marcus repeated, his voice strained. "You're staying for 2 whole weeks." "I thought we could spend some quality time together," I said, reaching for his hand. He pulled it away, as if my touch burned him. The ride back to Marcus's apartment was silent. Amelia had gone to her own place, claiming an early meeting the next day, though I suspected she just wanted to escape the tension. As soon as we entered the apartment, I could feel something building in Marcus, like a pressure cooker about to explode. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? He finally asked, his voice cold. I wanted to surprise you, I said. I thought you'd be happy to see me. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that bore no resemblance to my son's once warm laughter. Happy. Do you have any idea what you've done? Those people at dinner are vital to my career, to my future. And you just waltzed in with your stories about Illinois and nursing and completely undermined everything I've built here. I felt as though he had slapped me. What do you mean? Why would you lie about where you're from, about what I do? Because nobody here respects a kid from the Midwest whose mother is a nurse, he shouted. Do you think I'd be where I am if people knew I came from nothing? That I grew up in a tiny house with secondhand furniture and Walmart clothes? Tears welled in my eyes. You didn't come from nothing. You came from love. Love doesn't get you into the right circles in London, he snapped. Love doesn't impress the Harringtons or get you invited to their country house for the weekend. So you told them I was a surgeon from Boston? I asked, my voice small. Marcus ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. It doesn't matter now. You've ruined everything. You should have called. I don't have room or time for your kind of drama. My kind of drama? I repeated, anger starting to replace my hurt. I came all this way to see you spent my savings on this trip because I missed you, and that's drama to you. Yes, he shouted. Showing up unannounced, embarrassing me in front of my colleagues. That's drama. Did you ever stop to think that maybe there's a reason I don't call much anymore? That maybe I've outgrown Springfield and everything it represents? The argument escalated as I defended myself, telling him how lonely I'd been since retirement, how much I missed our relationship. That's your problem, he said coldly. You've always been too clingy, too dependent on me. It was suffocating growing up with you, always hovering, always making me feel guilty for wanting my own life. His words cut deep, each one a knife to my heart. He continued his tirade, criticizing everything from my appearance to my accent to my table manners at dinner. And for God's sake, he said, those shoes with that purse, you look like a tourist from the Midwest, which I guess you are. Do you know how embarrassing that was? I didn't realize my shoes were more important than seeing my son, I said quietly. Marcus laughed again, that terrible, unfamiliar laugh. God, you don't get it, do you? Everything is about appearance here. Everything. Then came the bombshell. Amelia and I have been dating for 2 years. We're engaged, getting married in 3 months. I stared at him in shock. 2 years. But you never mentioned her, not once. Because I knew you'd want to meet her to insert yourself into our relationship. I'm your mother, I said. Of course I'd want to meet the woman you're planning to marry. That's exactly the problem, he exploded. You think being my mother gives you the right to be part of every aspect of my life. It doesn't. The most painful revelation came next. You know what I've been telling everyone here, that my mother died of cancer 5 years ago. It was easier than explaining you. The room seemed to spin around me. You told people I was dead. Amelia chose that moment to return, having apparently forgotten something. She looked horrified when she walked in on our argument, especially when she heard Marcus's last statement. Marcus, that's enough, she said firmly. You're being cruel. He rounded on her. Stay out of this, Amelia. You don't understand. I understand that this is your mother and you're treating her terribly, she replied, coming to stand beside me. I'm sorry, Sally. He's not usually like this. Yes, he is, I said softly. I just didn't want to see it. Marcus grabbed his keys from the counter. I can't do this right now. Mom, I'll pay for a hotel. You can't stay here. No, I said, finding strength in my anger. I came all this way to see you. We need to talk about this like adults. What happened next still haunts me. Marcus took my arm, not roughly but firmly, and guided me toward the door. I have important people coming over tomorrow. I can't have you here making a scene and embarrassing me. Marcus, Amelia protested. But he wasn't listening. He opened the door and practically pushed me into the hallway. I'll call you tomorrow. We'll figure something out. My suitcase, I said, tears streaming down my face. My things. He disappeared for a moment, then returned with my small suitcase, setting it beside me in the hallway. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is for the best. I'll find you a nice hotel." "Marcus, please," I begged. "Don't do this." But he had made up his mind. The last thing I saw was his face cold and distant as he shut the door on me. I stood there in the hallway, listening to the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, feeling as though my heart had been ripped from my chest. Through the door, I could hear the muffled sounds of Marcus and Amelia arguing, then silence. Minutes passed as I stood there in shock, unable to move, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then the elevator dinged, and several well-dressed people stepped out clearly, heading to Marcus's apartment for the gathering he had mentioned. They looked at me curiously as I stood there with my suitcase, tears streaming down my face. One woman asked if I was all right, but I couldn't speak. I managed to step into the elevator as they knocked on Marcus's door. As the doors closed, I heard laughter and greetings, the party beginning, as if nothing had happened, as if I didn't exist. Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. I stood under the building's small awning, clutching my suitcase, completely lost in a foreign country where my own son had just shut me out of his life. The doorman looked at me with pity, but didn't offer help. Eventually, I stepped out into the rain, not caring anymore that I was getting soaked. The cold water mixed with my tears as I wandered away from the building, away from the sun I no longer recognized, into the vast, indifferent city of London. I wandered the rainy streets of London for what felt like hours. My clothes soaked through, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The city lights blurred through my tears, cars splashing past me, people hurrying by under umbrellas without a second glance at the sobbing older woman pulling a small suitcase. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to seek shelter. I found a modest hotel several blocks away, the kind with a flickering neon vacancy sign and worn carpet in the lobby. The night clerk looked concerned when I approached the desk, water dripping from my clothes and hair. "Good heavens, madam, you're drenched," he exclaimed in a thick Cockney accent. "Let me get you a towel." He disappeared briefly and returned with a threadbare but clean towel. I thanked him through chattering teeth, explaining that I needed a room for the night. When he quoted the price, my heart sank even further. London was far more expensive than I had anticipated. At this rate, my savings would be depleted long before my scheduled return flight in 2 weeks. "Just for tonight," I said, handing over my credit card. "I'll figure something out tomorrow." The room was small and dated but clean. I peeled off my wet clothes and hung them in the tiny bathroom to dry, then wrapped myself in the scratchy hotel robe and sat on the edge of the bed. The events of the evening kept replaying in my mind, like a horror movie I couldn't turn off. My son had told people I was dead. He was ashamed of me, of where he came from, of everything I had sacrificed to give him a good life. The realization was almost too painful to bear. I reached for my phone to call Susan back home, but stopped myself. It was the middle of the night in Illinois, and what would I say? That my successful, loving son had turned into a monster who had thrown his own mother out into the rain. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake all night, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, trying to make sense of how my loving son had become this cold stranger. Had I missed the signs over the years? Had he always resented me? Or was this transformation something that happened after he moved to London? I replayed every conversation we'd had over the past few years, looking for clues I might have missed. Morning brought no clarity, only the harsh reality of my situation. I checked my bank account on my phone, calculating how long I could afford to stay in even this modest hotel. The answer was disheartening. 5 days at most, and that would leave me with almost nothing for food or transportation. I had 2 weeks until my return flight, and changing the date would cost more than I could afford. I was effectively stranded in a foreign country with dwindling funds and nowhere to go. After a meager breakfast in the hotel lobby, I tried calling Marcus. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message, keeping my voice steady despite my emotions. "Marcus, it's Mom. Please call me back. We need to talk about what happened. I'm at the Westbrook Hotel on Marylebone Road." I tried again an hour later, and then again in the afternoon. No response. I sent text messages that showed as delivered, but remained unread. My son was ghosting me thousands of miles from home. Sitting alone in that hotel room, I faced a choice. I could wallow in misery and self-pity, or I could try to make the most of this disastrous situation. I had always wanted to see London after all. This wasn't how I'd imagined doing it, but perhaps exploring the city would distract me from the pain. I put on my now dry clothes from the previous night, applied some makeup to hide my puffy eyes, and ventured out into the city. The rain had stopped, though gray clouds still hung low in the sky, matching my mood. With my limited budget, I focused on free attractions. I wandered through Hyde Park, sat on a bench watching the swans glide across the Serpentine. I found my way to Trafalgar Square, then walked along the Thames, taking in the sights of the London Eye and Big Ben in the distance. I couldn't afford to enter most museums or attractions, but walking among the historic buildings provided some distraction. By late afternoon, I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. I stopped at a small cafe to rest my aching feet and splurged on a cup of tea, carefully counting out the unfamiliar coins to pay. "Is this seat taken?" a voice asked as I stared into my teacup. I looked up to see an elderly British woman with silver hair, styled in an elegant bob, dressed in a tweed suit that had seen better days, but was clearly well loved. "No, please," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. She sat down with her own cup of tea and a scone. "American, are you here on holiday?" Something about her kind eyes and gentle manner broke through my defenses. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything, the words pouring out, like the tears I could no longer hold back. Her name was Dorothy Fletcher, a retired literature professor who had lived in London all her life. She listened without interruption, occasionally reaching across the table to pat my hand when my voice broke. "My dear," she said when I finished, "what a dreadful ordeal. Some children forget themselves entirely when they leave the nest. They create new identities and convince themselves they've earned everything on their own." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I can't afford to stay in the hotel much longer, but my flight home isn't for 2 weeks." Dorothy studied me thoughtfully. "I have a spare room, you know. It's nothing fancy, just a box room in my little flat in Notting Hill, but you'd be welcome to it until your flight." I stared at her in disbelief. "You'd do that for a complete stranger?" She smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "You wouldn't be the first stray I've taken in, my dear. Besides, we're not strangers anymore, are we? You've just told me your life story." Despite my situation, I found myself laughing for the first time since I'd arrived in London. "I suppose I have." Dorothy insisted I move into her spare room that very evening. Her flat was in an old Victorian building that had seen better days, but it was warm and filled with books, antique furniture, and the kind of lived-in comfort that Marcus's sterile apartment had lacked. "My husband Albert passed away 10 years ago," she explained, as she showed me to the small but cozy spare room. "The flat's too big for just me, but I can't bear to leave it. Too many memories." Over the next few days, Dorothy became my guide to London, showing me the city through the eyes of a lifelong resident. We visited free museums, walked through hidden gardens and historic neighborhoods, and sat in her favorite parks, feeding the birds. In the evenings, we would cook simple meals together and talk for hours over cups of tea. I learned that Dorothy had her own experience with family estrangement. Her daughter Caroline had moved to Australia 20 years earlier and rarely contacted her mother. "She married a man I didn't approve of," Dorothy explained one evening. "I was too vocal about my concerns and she cut me off almost completely. It took me years to realize that my disapproval had cost me my relationship with my only child." "Did you ever reconcile?" I asked. Dorothy smiled sadly. "Partially. We speak on the phone a few times a year now. She sends Christmas cards with photos of my grandchildren whom I've never met. It's not what I would have chosen, but it's better than nothing." "How did you cope with the pain?" I asked. "By building a life that wasn't centered around Caroline's approval or presence," she said. "I found purpose in my teaching and my community and my friendships. The pain never fully disappears, but it becomes manageable when you stop defining yourself solely as someone's mother." Her words resonated deeply with me. Since retirement, I had been drifting my identity as a nurse, gone my role as an active mother long past. Perhaps that was why Marcus's rejection had hit me so hard. Without my career or my motherhood, who was I? Dorothy seemed to read my thoughts. "You're still Sally Peterson," she said gently. "The nurse who saved countless children, the woman who raised a son on her own, the person sitting across from me with strength she doesn't yet recognize. Marcus's rejection doesn't diminish any of that." With each passing day in Dorothy's company, I felt a small piece of myself returning the wound of Marcus's betrayal, still raw, but no longer all-consuming. I continued trying to reach him, leaving voicemails and sending texts, but received no response. Then a week into my stay with Dorothy, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Amelia. "Sally, it's Amelia Marcus's. Well, I don't know what I am to him anymore." Her voice sounded strained, and I could tell she had been crying. "Amelia, is everything all right? Is Marcus okay?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Marcus is far from okay, but that's not your problem. I feel terrible about what happened. The way he treated you was unforgivable. I've been trying to convince him to call you, but he's not in a good place right now." "What do you mean?" I asked, concern for my son overriding my anger. "Can we meet? There are things you should know, things I think would help you understand what's happening with him. Not that it excuses his behavior, but—" We arranged to meet the following day at a quiet cafe near Regent's Park. I told Dorothy about the call, and she insisted on accompanying me partway there. "Just to the park entrance," she said. "I want to make sure this isn't some sort of trick." "Amelia wouldn't do that," I said, though in truth I barely knew the woman. "Perhaps not intentionally," Dorothy replied. "But she's caught between loyalties, and that can make people unpredictable." The next day, Dorothy walked with me to Regent's Park, giving me a fierce hug before leaving me to meet Amelia alone. "Remember," she said, "whatever you learn today, your worth isn't tied to Marcus's approval." Amelia was already waiting when I arrived at the cafe, a steaming cup in front of her, her fingers nervously tapping the table. She looked different from the polished, confident woman I had met at Marcus's apartment. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes. "Sally," she said, standing to greet me. "Thank you for coming." We exchanged awkward pleasantries as I ordered my own coffee, then sat in silence for a moment, neither quite sure how to begin. "I ended things with Marcus," Amelia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After what happened with you, I couldn't continue the relationship." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, sadness for both of them, but also a flicker of validation that someone else had recognized how wrong his behavior had been. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. "Don't be," she replied. "The truth is, things had been unraveling for some time. What you saw was just the breaking point." She took a deep breath and began to reveal the truth about my son's life in London, a truth far different from the success story he had presented to me over the years. "There's something you need to know about Marcus," Amelia said, stirring her coffee absently. "The life he's been living here, the one he's been presenting to you and everyone else, it's not real. It's a facade he's created, and it's been crumbling for months now." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, not real?" Amelia sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Marcus does work at Harrington Global Finance, but he's not the successful executive he's pretended to be. He's constantly in danger of losing his position. Richard Harrington keeps him on because Marcus has been willing to do the jobs no one else wants, working impossible hours and taking blame for others' mistakes." The image of my ambitious, brilliant son, reduced to an office scapegoat, was difficult to process. But his apartment, his clothes, the lifestyle he seems to have, all purchased on credit, Amelia said. "Marcus is in serious debt, Sally. Credit cards, maxed out personal loans he can't repay. The apartment is far beyond what he can afford, but he insists on keeping it because of the address, the prestige." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive, sliding it across the table. "These are photos from Marcus's real life in London. Not the curated images he posts on social media or sends to you, but the truth. I took the USB, turning it over in my hand. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said. "And because I hope it might help you understand why he reacted the way he did when you arrived. It doesn't excuse his behavior, nothing could but context might help." She explained that Marcus had become obsessed with climbing the social ladder in London, desperate to fit into circles that viewed Americans, especially those from small Midwestern towns, as provincial and unsophisticated. He had created an entirely new background for himself, claiming to come from old Boston money, with a surgeon mother and a father who had been a successful businessman before his death. "The older couple you saw in that photo at his apartment," Amelia continued, "those are Richard Harrington's parents. Marcus has been cultivating them, trying to become like a son to them. They've taken him under their wing, invited him to their country house on weekends, introduced him to their friends. They're the ones who introduced him to me." "And you?" I asked. "Where do you fit into all this?" Amelia looked down at her hands. "My family has connections that Marcus thought would help his career. My father is on the board of several financial institutions. At first I was flattered by Marcus's attention. He can be incredibly charming when he wants to be. But over time, I started noticing the lies, the way he changed his story, depending on who he was talking to." She revealed that Marcus had been making increasingly risky investments, trying to generate the wealth he was pretending to have. Some had paid off initially, giving him a false sense of security, but recent ones had gone disastrously wrong. "The night you arrived," she said, "he had just learned that an investment had failed completely. He lost everything he had put into it, money he had borrowed from some very unforgiving people. He was already in a state when you knocked on the door." "So I was just the convenient target for his anger," I said, trying to process everything she was telling me. "Partly," Amelia agreed. "But there's more. Marcus has been telling everyone that his mother you died of cancer 5 years ago. When you showed up, it wasn't just an unwelcome surprise. It was the collapse of a significant part of his fabricated identity. The Harringtons and their social circle value honesty and integrity above all else. If they discovered he'd been lying about something as fundamental as his mother being alive..." I felt physically ill. He was willing to erase me from his life for social advancement. "I think it started as a small lie that grew out of control," Amelia said. "From what I can gather, he mentioned once that his mother was ill and someone assumed it was cancer. Rather than correct them, he let them believe it. Then when people expressed sympathy, he found himself playing the role of the grieving son. It gave him a certain cachet in these circles, a tragic backstory that made him interesting." "And our relationship?" "The stories I told at dinner about his childhood. They directly contradicted the narrative he's been building for years," she said. "You mentioned Springfield nursing financial struggles, all the things he's been desperately trying to hide." The cafe had begun to fill with the lunch crowd, voices rising around us. I sat in silence for a long moment, trying to reconcile this new information with the son I thought I knew. "What happens now?" I finally asked. "With Marcus, I mean." Amelia's expression darkened. "I'm worried about him, Sally. When I left, he was in a bad place. His career is in jeopardy, his finances are a disaster, and now he's lost me too. I've tried to get him to seek help, to talk to someone professional, but he refuses." "Should I try to see him again?" I asked, torn between maternal concern and self-protection. Amelia shook her head firmly. "Not right now. He's angry and looking for someone to blame. Give him time to process everything that's happening. Maybe in a few weeks, when you're back home, you can reach out again." As our meeting drew to a close, Amelia hesitated, then reached into her bag again. "One more thing. Your hotel bill from that first night, Marcus never paid it like he promised. I took care of it." She handed me an envelope. "And this is for you. It's not much, but it might help with expenses until your flight home." Inside was £500. I tried to refuse, but she insisted. "It's the least I can do after what happened," she said. "Besides, I come from money, Sally. Real money, not the kind Marcus has been pretending to have. This is nothing to me, but it might make your remaining time in London more comfortable." We parted with an awkward hug, two women connected by our complicated relationships with the same troubled man. As I watched her walk away, I felt a strange mixture of gratitude for her honesty and sorrow for the pain she must be feeling. Back at Dorothy's flat, I sat at her small kitchen table and plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The photos it contained told the story Amelia had described. Images of Marcus looking exhausted and stressed in his office late at night. Screenshots of financial statements showing alarming amounts of debt. Text messages between Marcus and various people begging for extensions on loans, making promises he clearly couldn't keep. One photo particularly broke my heart. It showed Marcus alone in what appeared to be his office bathroom, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands, his perfect suit rumpled, his carefully styled hair a mess. He looked broken, defeated, nothing like the confident, successful man he had pretended to be. Dorothy found me crying over the laptop and gently closed it. "Enough," she said. "You've seen what you needed to see." "I should go to him," I said through my tears. "He needs help." "What he needs," Dorothy said firmly, "is to face the consequences of his choices. You cannot fix this for him, Sally. It's a painful lesson every parent must learn eventually. Our adult children must make their own mistakes and find their own way back from them." Over a cup of tea, I told Dorothy everything Amelia had shared. She listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. "What will you do now?" she asked when I had finished. I thought about it for a long moment. "Go home," I finally said. "Continue with my original plan to fly back next week. Marcus knows where to find me when he's ready." "And if he's never ready?" Dorothy asked gently. The question hit me hard. The possibility that my son might never want me back in his life was almost too painful to contemplate. But Dorothy's own experience with her daughter had taught me that it was a reality I needed to face. "Then I'll have to learn to live with that," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I can't make him want a relationship with me. I can only be here if he ever decides he does." Dorothy smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "That, my dear, is wisdom many parents never achieve." The remainder of my time in London took on a bittersweet quality. Dorothy continued to show me her city, introducing me to her friends, taking me to free concerts in churches and community gardens hidden behind rows of houses. I stopped trying to contact Marcus, though I checked my phone constantly for messages from him. None came. Amelia called once more before I left, letting me know that Marcus had moved out of the expensive apartment into a much smaller place in a less prestigious neighborhood. She had heard through mutual friends that he was looking for a new job, his position at Harrington Global Finance having become untenable after Richard Harrington discovered some of his lies. "He's hitting rock bottom," Amelia said. "It's painful to watch, but maybe necessary." "Will you keep in touch?" I asked. "Let me know if things get really bad." "Of course," she promised. "Despite everything, I do care about him. And I've come to care about you too, Sally." The day of my departure arrived. Dorothy insisted on accompanying me to Heathrow, helping me navigate the complex terminal. As we sat waiting for my flight to be called, she took my hand. "You will be all right, my dear," she said. "This pain you're feeling, it will not always be so acute." "Thank you," I said, squeezing her hand. "For everything. You saved me, Dorothy." She laughed softly. "Nonsense. I merely provided a bed and some company. You saved yourself the moment you decided not to let Marcus's rejection define you." We promised to stay in touch, exchanging email addresses and phone numbers. As I walked through the security gate, I turned to wave at her one last time, this unexpected friend who had appeared in my darkest hour. The long flight home gave me time to reflect on everything that had happened. The devastating rejection, the painful truths about Marcus's life, the unexpected kindness of strangers. By the time the plane touched down in Chicago, I had made a decision. I would rebuild my life not around the hope of reconciliation with Marcus, but around my own needs and desires. If Marcus ever returned to me, it would be to the mother I truly was not, the one he wanted me to be, or the one he had tried to erase. Returning to my small house in Springfield after the London disaster was like entering a stranger's home. Everything looked the same: the faded floral couch, the collection of ceramic birds on the mantel, the quilt my mother had made hanging on the wall. But I saw it all through new eyes now, eyes that had glimpsed a wider world and faced painful truths. Susan picked me up from the airport full of excited questions about my trip. I had texted her briefly from London, telling her things hadn't gone well with Marcus, but providing few details. Now sitting in her car, as the familiar Midwestern landscape rolled by, I found myself unable to maintain the facade any longer. "He told people I was dead, Susan," I said, my voice breaking. "My own son erased me from his life." Susan nearly drove off the road in shock. "He what?" I told her everything, the words pouring out in a torrent, my carefully constructed composure finally crumbling. By the time we reached my driveway, both of us were in tears. "That doesn't sound like the Marcus I knew," Susan said, shaking her head in disbelief. "The boy who made you breakfast in bed every Mother's Day, who called you from college just to tell you about his day." "That Marcus is gone," I said, "replaced by someone I don't recognize." Susan stayed with me that first night home, helping me unpack, making us dinner, sitting up late talking. Her presence was a balm to my wounded heart, a reminder that not everyone I loved would abandon me. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, as we sipped tea in my kitchen, the Illinois night quiet around us. I thought of Dorothy's advice, of the lessons I had learned during those painful days in London. "Rebuild," I said simply. "Not my relationship with Marcus, that's beyond my control, but my life. I've spent too long defining myself as Marcus's mother, and not enough time being just Sally." The next few weeks were a process of rediscovery. I looked at my house with fresh eyes, rearranging furniture, donating items I no longer needed, creating a space that reflected me, rather than memories of a family that no longer existed. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for. The physical labor of digging in the earth was therapeutic, a tangible way to create new life from bare soil. Susan helped me find part-time work at a local clinic, just 2 days a week, assisting with administrative tasks. It wasn't nursing, but it kept my mind active and helped me rebuild my depleted savings. The extra income was necessary, but more important was the sense of purpose it gave me, the connection to a world beyond my empty house. Through a flyer at the clinic, I discovered a support group for parents estranged from their adult children. The first meeting was terrifying. Walking into that church basement, seeing the circle of chairs filled with other parents whose children had cut them off, made the reality of my situation impossible to deny. But it also provided something I desperately needed, the knowledge that I wasn't alone. There was Maria, whose daughter had stopped speaking to her after marrying a man who isolated her from her family. There was Robert, whose son had cut him off after a political disagreement spiraled out of control. There was Jennifer, whose twins had accused her of favoritism, and both stopped contact. Each story was different, yet the pain in the room was universal and oddly comforting. "The hardest part," our group facilitator Sarah explained, "is accepting that you cannot control your child's decision. You can extend olive branches, you can work on your own issues, you can leave the door open, but ultimately reconciliation requires both parties to want it." Those words became my mantra in the months that followed. I could not make Marcus want a relationship with me. I could only work on becoming the kind of person who was at peace, regardless of his choice. I found myself returning to old hobbies I had abandoned years ago. I joined a local choir, my voice rusty at first, but growing stronger with each rehearsal. I took a pottery class at the community college, finding satisfaction in creating something tangible with my hands. I volunteered at the animal shelter, walking dogs and socializing cats, finding comfort in their uncomplicated affection. 3 months passed without a word from Marcus. I had stopped checking my phone constantly, stopped holding my breath every time an email notification appeared. Life had developed a new rhythm, quieter than before, but not without joy. Then came the call from James, Marcus's childhood friend, the one who had encouraged my trip to London. His voice was tight with concern. "Mrs. P, have you heard from Marcus recently?" "No," I said, my heart immediately racing. Why is he okay? James hesitated. I'm not sure. I got a strange email from him last week. He said he lost his job, that he's in some kind of trouble. I tried calling him, but he's not answering. I thought maybe he had contacted you. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of trouble, James? He wasn't specific, but he mentioned something about financial issues and possible legal problems. Mrs. P, it didn't sound like Marcus. It sounded like someone at the end of their rope. After we hung up, I sat in my garden surrounded by the tomato plants and zinnias I had nurtured through the summer, and considered my options. I could try to call Marcus again, though experience suggested he wouldn't answer. I could email him offering help, though that too would likely be ignored. Or I could wait, allowing him to face the consequences of his choices, as Dorothy had advised. The decision was made for me when an email arrived from Amelia the next day. Sally, it read, I thought you should know that Marcus and I have officially ended our engagement. He's not doing well. He lost his job at Harrington after they discovered he had been misrepresenting his credentials. There are rumors of financial improprieties as well, though I don't know the details. I'm worried about him, but he's pushed away everyone who cares about him. I thought you should know. I sat with that information for a day, discussing it with my support group, considering it from all angles. The consensus was clear, painful, but necessary. I could not rescue Marcus from a situation of his own making. Any attempt to do so would likely be rejected and would set back my own healing process. The best thing I could do for both of us was to continue on my path, leaving the door open, but not standing anxiously beside it. I wrote a simple email to Marcus, the first contact I had initiated since leaving London. Marcus, I've heard you're going through a difficult time. I want you to know that I love you, and my door is always open to you. When and if you're ready to talk, I'm here. Mom. I didn't expect a response, and none came. Life continued its new rhythm. Summer faded into fall, the garden yielded its harvest, and I found myself hosting a small Thanksgiving dinner for friends from the choir and support group. As we sat around my dining table sharing food and stories, I realized with surprise that I was happy, not the uncomplicated happiness of my life before London, but a deeper, more resilient joy, born of struggle and survival. Then, on a cold December morning, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Marcus standing on my porch, a duffel bag at his feet. He was almost unrecognizable from the polished, confident man who had opened his London apartment door to me 9 months earlier. His hair was longer, unstyled, his face thinner with dark circles under his eyes. He wore jeans and a worn sweater, a far cry from the expensive suits he had favored in London. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on the single syllable. I stood frozen in the doorway, 1,000 emotions flooding through me at once. Love and anger, hope and fear, joy and apprehension. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I have nowhere else to go." I stepped aside silently, allowing him into the house he had grown up in, the home he had been so eager to leave behind. He stood awkwardly in the living room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. "You changed things," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I've changed too." He nodded, rubbing a hand across his face. "I deserve that." We sat on the couch, a careful distance between us, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "I lost everything," he said. "My job, my apartment, my savings, everything." "I know," I said. "James called. Amelia emailed." He looked surprised. "You've been in touch with Amelia?" "She reached out to me in London after what happened. She told me about your financial situation, about the lies you'd been telling." Marcus flinched. "So you know?" "That you told people I was dead." "Yes, I know." He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders beginning to shake. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. What I did to you was unforgivable." I watched my son break down the walls he had built around himself, finally crumbling completely. Part of me wanted to reach out to comfort him, as I had done throughout his childhood. Another part held back, wary of being hurt again, of having my love thrown back in my face. "Why are you here, Marcus?" I asked quietly. He looked up, his face streaked with tears. "James told me what you did," he said. "That you spent your retirement savings on that trip to London. That you had nowhere to stay after I threw you out. Amelia told me about the woman who took you in, about how you had to survive in a foreign country because of what I did." His voice broke completely. I didn't know. I was so caught up in my own problems, my own lies, that I never even thought about what would happen to you. "I'm here because I need to tell you how sorry I am, even though sorry isn't enough. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. And I'm here because despite everything, you're still my mom, and I need you." As we sat there in the quiet living room, the weight of months of pain and separation hanging between us, I made a decision. Not to rush into forgiveness or to pretend the hurt hadn't happened, but to offer Marcus what he had denied me in London, a chance to be heard. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning." And he did. The story poured out of him, how he had started making small exaggerations about his background when he first arrived in London, trying to fit in with his wealthier colleagues. How those exaggerations had grown into elaborate lies, each one requiring more lies to maintain. How he had become trapped in a web of his own making, desperate to maintain the illusion of success and sophistication. At some point, he said, I started believing my own lies. The fake Marcus, the one with the surgeon mother and the Boston background, he was more interesting, more worthy of respect than the real me. When you showed up in London, it wasn't just that you threatened to expose my lies. It was that you reminded me of who I really was, where I really came from, and I hated that. I hated myself for being ashamed of my own mother, of my own upbringing. The financial deceptions had started as an attempt to live the lifestyle his fabricated background demanded. Credit cards, loans from colleagues, increasingly risky investments to try to dig himself out of debt. Then came the final fall, falsifying documents at work to cover a particularly bad investment being discovered, fired, and reported to regulatory authorities. I'm facing possible charges, he admitted. At the very least, I'll never work in finance again. My reputation is destroyed. Everyone who believed in me, who trusted me, feels betrayed. By the time he finished talking, the winter afternoon had faded into evening. We sat in the gathering darkness, the only light coming from the small lamp beside the couch, casting long shadows across the room. I understand if you want me to leave, Marcus said. After what I did to you, I wouldn't blame you. I considered my response carefully. The support group had taught me the importance of boundaries, of protecting myself while still leaving room for healing. Dorothy had shown me the value of standing firm in my own worth, regardless of my child's approval. You can stay, I said finally. But there are conditions. Marcus nodded, waiting. First, you need to get professional help. Therapy at minimum. What happened in London wasn't just a bad day or a temporary lapse in judgment. It was the culmination of years of lies and self-deception. I've already started, he said, surprising me. I found a therapist in Chicago before I came here. I've had 3 sessions. Good, I said. Second, I'm not giving you money. Whatever financial mess you're in, you need to deal with it yourself. I'll help you find resources, legal advice if you need it, but my savings are gone, spent on that trip to London. He winced at the reminder, but nodded again. Third, we go slow. Rebuilding trust takes time. I'm not the same person I was before London. I've built a life that doesn't revolve around you, and I'm not giving that up. I understand, he said softly. And finally, I said, you need to make amends. Not just to me, but to everyone you've hurt with your lies. Amelia, the Harringtons, your colleagues, your friends. Real amends, not just empty apologies. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if some of those people will even speak to me, he said, but I'll try. We ordered takeout for dinner, eating in the kitchen, as we had done thousands of times during his childhood. The conversation was stilted at first, both of us navigating this new, fragile relationship, but gradually became easier. Marcus asked about my garden, my job at the clinic, my choir. I asked about his therapy, his plans for the future, his health. As he helped me clear the dishes, Marcus paused, a plate in his hand. "I don't deserve a second chance," he said. "I know that." I took the plate from him, our fingers briefly touching. None of us get what we deserve in this life, good or bad. We get what we get, and we choose what to do with it. I'm choosing to give you a second chance, not because you deserve it, but because I choose to. What you do with that chance is up to you. The weeks that followed were challenging. Marcus slept in his old bedroom, now my sewing room, on an air mattress among boxes of fabric and half-finished projects. He found a job at a local hardware store, humble work, that paid barely above minimum wage, but gave him structure and purpose. He continued his therapy, sometimes returning from sessions quiet and withdrawn, other times eager to discuss insights he had gained. There were setbacks, arguments when old patterns emerged, moments of tension when the past felt too present. But there were also breakthroughs. The day Marcus sent emails to everyone he had deceived, taking full responsibility for his actions, without excuses. The afternoon he helped me plant spring bulbs in the garden, both of us digging in the cold earth, preparing for a bloom we would not see for months. The evening he cooked dinner for my friends from the support group, listening to their stories with genuine interest and respect. Slowly we began to build something new. Not the uncomplicated mother-son relationship of his childhood, nor the distant performative connection of his London years, but something more honest, more balanced, more real. As spring arrived, bringing new growth to my garden and new possibilities to our lives, Marcus received news that the financial authorities had decided not to press charges, accepting his voluntary agreement never to work in the industry again. It was a reprieve, a chance to truly start over. "What will you do now?" I asked, as we sat on the back porch, watching the first daffodils push through the soil. "I've been thinking about teaching," he said. "High school math and economics, using my finance background in a different way." I nodded, seeing in this choice a form of redemption, a way for him to use his knowledge to help others, rather than to deceive. "And I've been writing to Dorothy," he added, "thanking her for taking care of you when I failed to. She's quite remarkable." "Yes," I agreed. "She is." We sat in companionable silence, watching a robin build a nest in the maple tree at the edge of the yard. The pain of London would never completely disappear for either of us. The memory of standing in that hallway, hearing the deadbolt slide into place, would always be a part of me. But it no longer defined me or my relationship with my son. I had learned that love doesn't require the sacrifice of dignity, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our children is to let them face the consequences of their choices. Marcus had learned that worth cannot be found in appearances or approval, that honesty, however painful, is less destructive than deception, and that redemption begins with accepting responsibility. Together, we were learning that relationships, like gardens, require constant tending, that growth often comes after periods of dormancy, and that what appears dead in winter can, with patience and care, bloom again in spring. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you loved most in the world? Or perhaps you've been the one who caused pain to someone who only wanted to love you? What do you think about the journey Sally and Marcus went through? Life often tests our capacity for forgiveness and growth in ways we never expected. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of family relationships, healing, and redemption. Share your own experiences in the comments below, or tell me where you're watching from. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, it's never too late to rebuild what's been broken, whether it's a relationship or your own sense of self-worth. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.